Tear it down. That's what the HOA president told me, standing in front of the steel gate her board had bolted across my driveway like she owned my front yard. 3 months later, that same woman was sitting in a courtroom while a judge calmly explained that my land was never under her authority at all, and ordered her HOA to pay me for what they'd done. All of that noise, all that stress started because I poured one concrete driveway so my mom wouldn't get stuck in the mud again. My name is Garrett Hayes. I'm 42, a retired firefighter, and I live on a narrow strip of land my grandfather bought back in the 80s, out on the edge of what later became a fancy planned community. When he bought it, there was no Maple Grove Estates, no big stone sign, no HOA newsletters, just fields, a 2-lane road, and a dirt path he carved himself from the road to the house. He used to tell me, half serious, half joking, "A man's driveway is the spine of his home. You lose that, you lose everything." Back then, I thought he was being dramatic. Turns out he was predicting my future. The real trouble started when my mom, Evelyn, had a stroke. One stormy night, the old dirt driveway turned into soup, and when the ambulance tried to come in, the tires sank and spun. The paramedics ended up parking on the road and carrying her on a stretcher through ankle-deep mud while she kept apologizing for causing a scene. After that, every rut in that path felt like a threat. Once she came home in a wheelchair, she was scared to even roll down to the mailbox because the front wheels kept catching and digging in. I'd spent 20 years responding to emergencies for other people, fire wrecks, medical calls, and now I was staring at a preventable hazard in my own front yard. So I did what I knew how to do. I went to the county, pulled the permit, checked the official parcel map to make sure I wasn't crossing any lines, hired a licensed contractor I trusted from an old job, and we built a proper driveway. Gravel compaction rebar, concrete inspection, all by the book. When it cured, I rolled my mom down that smooth gray surface. No mud, no ruts, no fear. She laughed, cried a little, and said, "Your grandfather would have loved this." For the first time in a long time, I went to bed feeling like I'd actually made her safer. About a week later, I opened my mailbox and saw a clean white envelope with a gold logo, Maple Grove Homeowners Association. I almost laughed. I didn't live in Maple Grove. I lived next to it. But I opened it. The letter was full of cheerful phrases about our community and architectural harmony. Then dropped the real point: any exterior work, including driveways, had to be approved by their board, with a 12-page application fee and 6 to 8 weeks of review. I walked inside, opened my fireproof box, and pulled out my deed. Dated 1985, recorded years before Maple Grove even existed. No mention of any HOA, no covenants, nothing. My land was its own world on paper. So I copied the deed printed. The county map wrote a polite letter back, saying my property is not part of Maple Grove and not subject to your HOA. Please update your records, and thought that would be the end of it. 2 weeks later, another envelope showed up. The tone had changed. They disagreed with my interpretation, warned that failure to comply could result in consequences, and encouraged me to reconsider for the good of the community. A few days after that, the phone calls started, always around dinner. "Mr. Hayes, this is Lorraine Fletcher, president of the Maple Grove HOA. We need you to understand that community standards apply to everyone in this area." Her voice was clipped, like she'd given this exact speech 100 times. I explained calmly at first that my land wasn't in their plat, that the county had approved my driveway, that my mom's safety was not up for debate. She'd pause, then go right back to her script about boundaries and compliance. One night when I pushed back harder, she said, "If you keep ignoring us, you're going to regret it," and hung up. At the time, I shrugged it off. I shouldn't have. A few mornings later, around 6 a.m., I stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee and froze. At the end of my new driveway stood a black steel gate that hadn't been there the night before. 6 feet tall, welded bars chained and padlocked, sunk into 2 fresh concrete posts, right where my property met the public road, with a sign that read, "Private property. HOA authorized." The dirt around the posts was still loose. They had come in the night, dug, poured, installed, and left. I walked up, put my hand on the cold metal, and felt that sick, violated feeling you get when you realize somebody crossed your line while you were asleep. Inside, my mom called out, wondering why I was so quiet. I looked at that gate and had one clear thought. If she has another stroke today, the ambulance cannot reach our front door. I called the HOA office using the number on the letter. A young woman picked up voice flat, like she was reading from a script. I told her there was a gate blocking my driveway, and it needed to be removed immediately. She put me on hold, came back, and said, "Mr. Hayes, the gate is a protective measure due to your repeated non-compliance. To discuss removal, you'll need to pay the outstanding $300 fine and submit an application. Ms. Fletcher can meet with you in 3 days. 3 days with my emergency access locked behind a chain." That night, I spread my papers back out on the table. My deed, my grandfather's purchase, the survey, the county's official map, the HOA's colorful community boundary picture. On the county map, my parcel sat clearly outside Maple Grove. On the HOA map, their boundary line took a convenient little detour, just far enough to swallow my frontage. On their paper, they'd simply decided they owned my driveway. At the next HOA meeting, I walked into a beige clubhouse full of folding chairs and people who already thought they knew the story. I stood up, told them who I was, how long my family had been there, what happened with the ambulance, how I'd pulled permits and passed inspections. I handed copies of my deed and the county map down the rows. Lorraine sat at the front in a blazer, held up their boundary map, and said, "Our members voted to adopt this as our official boundary. As you can see, Mr. Hayes' property falls within our jurisdiction." I pointed out that it didn't match the county records. She shrugged and said, "Boundary questions can be resolved in court. Until then, the gate stays until he complies." Then, she called for a vote. Hands went up. People said things like, "We have to protect property values," and he should have followed the rules. Walking out of that room past neighbors who wouldn't meet my eye, I realized they weren't interested in facts. They had a story, and in that story, I was the villain. Then the internet did what the internet does. I'm not big on social media, but my mom's caregiver showed me a post in the Maple Grove group, a photo of my driveway with the gate captioned, "Resident refuses to follow community standards, forcing HOA to take action." Comments poured in. "People like this ruin neighborhoods. Just follow the rules like the rest of us." I heard he yelled at the board. A couple of folks quietly asked, "Isn't that his own land? And why is there a gate blocking a driveway where an ambulance might need to go?" But their voices got buried. By the weekend, the post had been shared into other local groups, and I had become the neighborhood cautionary tale. The caregiver quit saying people in her church were talking about that guy with the gate, and she couldn't risk her other clients. Neighbors who used to wave stopped. One couple literally crossed the street when they walked past our house. My mom sat by the window watching it all. One afternoon, I found her in tears looking at the gate. I feel like I'm in prison, she said. That hurt worse than anything the HOA had done. That night I sat at the kitchen table with two numbers in my head. On one side, $300. On the other, a deed from 1985. I could have paid the fine, filled out their 12-page form, smiled through my teeth, and probably had that gate gone in a week. Part of me wanted to just so my mom wouldn't feel trapped. But another part of me, the part that had run into burning houses because someone had to, kept asking, if you give in, now what do they own next? Your driveway, your roof. Who can visit your home? Around 2 in the morning, after reading case after case, where courts smacked down overreaching HOAs when someone finally pushed back, I made my decision. I wasn't paying them to trespass on my land. I called an old friend, Nate, who'd become a civil attorney, and sent him everything. Deeds, maps, permits, photos, screenshots, letters. A few days later, he called me back, and his tone told me he'd found something. Garrett, this isn't just sloppiness, he said. They've tried this boundary trick on other owners. Those folks caved. And I've got an email from a former HOA secretary who warned Lorraine that your parcel isn't in their jurisdiction. Lorraine replied, "We'll include it anyway. Owners rarely fight these things." That sentence was the twist for me. They weren't confused. They were counting on me to roll over. So we sued the HOA for trespass and interference, and Lorraine personally for defamation and overstepping her authority. Before the big trial, Nate asked the court for a temporary order to get the gate removed because it blocked emergency access. At that hearing, the HOA's lawyer tried to argue that the gate was a reasonable protective measure and that I could simply walk around it. The judge asked one question: can his mother in a wheelchair walk around it? The lawyer admitted she couldn't. The judge signed the order. 72 hours later, I watched workers cut through the same chain they'd wrapped around my driveway. Sparks flying steel panels, loading onto a flatbed. The ugly concrete posts stayed, but the gate was gone, and for the first time in weeks, my driveway was open. A few days after that, Lorraine called me herself. Her voice was suddenly softer, full of words like misunderstanding and compromise. She offered to reduce the fine, simplify the paperwork, and quietly fix the confusion if I dropped the lawsuit. I asked if she'd correct the boundary with the county and post a real apology in the same groups where the lies had spread. She didn't want to do either. That told me everything. "Then I'll see you in court," I said. And we hung up. On trial day, I walked into the courtroom in a gray suit that still felt new palms sweating binder under my arm. Nate and I sat at the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle, Lorraine sat between two polished lawyers in expensive suits, staring straight ahead. The HOA's attorney went first and told a neat story about maintaining standards and a resident who refused to follow established processes. Then Nate stood up and told the less convenient version, a family property that existed on paper long before Maple Grove, a driveway built with proper permits so a stroke patient could safely reach an ambulance, an HOA map that didn't match the county's steel gate built on land they didn't own, and a smear campaign that turned the homeowner into the villain. Nate put my certified deed on the screen, walked the judge through the chain of title, then placed the county's parcel map next to the HOA's boundary map. Even from the back of the room, you could see it. Their line had drifted over onto my land. The judge asked their lawyer, "What recorded document gives your client authority over this parcel?" There wasn't one. Then came the rest. My older neighbor testified that he'd watched my grandfather buy and work that land before Maple Grove existed. The county land office confirmed my boundaries had never changed. My contractor explained that every step of the driveway had been permitted and inspected. Finally, Nate showed the email from the former secretary, warning Lorraine that my parcel wasn't under HOA jurisdiction, and Lorraine's reply about owners rarely fighting. Under oath, she had to admit she'd seen my deed and that email before approving the gate. You could feel the air in that room change. When all the talking was done, the judge stepped out for a few minutes, came back, and read his decision. He ruled that Maple Grove HOA had no authority over my land, that their extended boundary had no basis in law, that the gate was an unlawful obstruction, and that the campaign under their banner had defamed me. He ordered them to pay $15,000 in damages, remove the remaining gate infrastructure within 30 days, and publish a written apology and correction in all the same community channels where the false story had spread. Then he added a $5,000 civil penalty against the HOA for knowingly exceeding its authority. His words were simple. This behavior cannot be tolerated. The gavel came down just a small knock, but to me it sounded like a lock finally clicking open. A couple of weeks later, an excavator came and yanked those concrete posts out like rotten teeth. The apology went up online, and the comments lit up. Some people still defended the HOA. Some admitted they'd believed the original story and were angry they'd been misled. Some started quietly asking questions about their own fines and violations. Life didn't turn into a movie ending. A few neighbors still avoid eye contact. Others walked over hands in their pockets and said, "I'm sorry I didn't back you up. My mom has a new caregiver who told me she specifically wanted to work for the guy who stood up to the HOA. The little trees by the driveway are taller now, branches starting to lean out over the concrete my grandfather dreamed about, and I finally poured. Some evenings, I stand where that gate used to be and look down that open line from my porch to the road, and I feel this quiet mix of relief and stubborn pride. It was never really about $300. It was about whether somebody with a logo and a mailing list gets to rewrite reality just because most people are too tired or scared to fight. So let me ask you this. If an HOA slapped a gate across your driveway and told you to pay a fine or stay locked in, would you do what I did, or would you pay? Just to keep the peace. Do you think associations like this actually protect neighborhoods, or do they mostly protect the people who like having power? Tell me what you think in the comments. Share your own HOA or neighborhood stories hit. Like if you think more people need to hear what really happens when you push back. And if you want to hear what some of my neighbors did after they saw me win. Stick around, because that's a story too.